Hi everyone. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know that some of the books that I review are a little bit off the beaten path. Not really books that you see reviewed by, well, pretty much almost anyone else on YouTube, as far as I know. There are a few exceptions, but a lot of the things I read are pretty obscure. And this is one of those. One of my more long-standing interests is science. It's what I do Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and science and math. So I'm interested in the history of those subjects, especially the history of science. And this next book that I want to review for you right now is actually a history of Renaissance science. As I say in the body of the review, from about 1400 to 1650 or so. And here's the book. It's called Man and Nature in the Renaissance by Alan G. Debus. And it has tons of interesting pictures in it. They're just black and white, but I like them nonetheless. There's one by Andreas Vesalius, The Human Body. He's a famous anatomist that's talked about. Just lots of them. Let's see. Here's one of Galileo's moons. All of that neat stuff. And there are a lot more. One of the neatest things about the book is that it talks about science in a way that acknowledges, in reality, what scientists of 500-600 years ago thought science to be, which is actually quite difficult considering how much change has happened in the scientific field and what we think of as scientific methodology. And I'll explain that. These days, the word magic really seems to be quite separate from the pursuit of science, right? I mean, you have Paracelsus, who, if you know anything about Paracelsus, I'll mention him a bit. He tries to incorporate astrology, magical sort of charms, old alchemical formulas into his, what he called science, what he recognized as science. But today that would sound about as scientific as the use of a Ouija board. But to divorce the one from the other is really to strip away the history of what you're looking at. There really were, on the one hand, the sort of arts of magic, the powers to conjure, the ability to discern the occult and the mathematical secrets of the universe. And then on the other hand, there's this rigorous empirical observation that we recognize today as science. But to look at them separately, or to sort of sieve away one from the other, is, like I said, ahistorical and misunderstands the spirit of science during the Renaissance. And Alan Debus, the author of this book, who was for many years a professor at the University of Chicago and a wonderful historian of early modern science, drives this point home repeatedly in each of the general areas discussed in the book. The topics covered are the ones that you would expect to be found in a book that summarizes the history of major scientific developments from, about the 2.5 centuries from 1400 to 1650. You have the study of nature, especially flora and fauna, the increased understanding of human physiology, which is where Andreas Vesalius comes in, cosmology, and a brief précis explaining the development of the scientific method, generally speaking. For example, as we get from Francis Bacon. Many of the Renaissance humanists, most notably Paracelsus, whom I mentioned earlier, wholly rejected the scholasticism and the Aristotelianism of previous generations, and they wanted to infuse science and the study of nature with a renewed appreciation for mysticism and alchemy. And while a religious understanding of the universe was totally central to Paracelsian science, he simultaneously emphasized observation and empiricism, which again makes it difficult to sort of tweeze out where science begins and where science stops for Paracelsus and his other anti-scholastic scientists. Observation had really been ignored by a lot of the scholastics, and especially by Aristotle. If you go back and you read Aristotle's works on physics, for example, they were not based in experiment. He didn't go up to the top of a tower like Galileo famously did and drop two things and see which one fell faster. His interest in chemistry, for example, especially iatrochemistry, speaks to his interest in observation. Aristotle's appreciation of science had been vitiated of all divine wisdom and knowledge by his paganism, of course, since he lived 300 years before Christianity. Paracelsus wished to correct for this by suffusing science with not necessarily Christian, but more Neoplatonic, Hermetic, and alchemal texts and influences. He thought the mathematical formalism of science resembled scholasticism, which he, like I said, avoided like the plague. Empiricism and observation critically improved a number of scientific areas, and not just alchemal medicine either. In the 15th century, crude medieval woodcuts of plants based on Pliny's centuries-old descriptions dominated the scholarship of botany. The drawings of Swiss naturalist Conrad Gessner and Italian botanist Androvandi were much more accurate than previous ones because of their attention to detail and increased amount of empirical observation, and therefore they could greatly benefit both botanists and physicians alike, who of course would use these pictures to go out into the wild and collect these plants and these animals. In the area of medicine, matters had similarly stagnated after the fall of the Hellenistic world. The practices of Galen predominated for a millennium after Galen's death, pretty much unchanged because of their wide use in their various translations. And Debus discusses the historical developments contributed by those from Andreas Vesalius, whose picture of the human body I showed you earlier, to William Harvey, who was the first person to accurately characterize blood flow in the human body. This book is really a wonderful introduction for two reasons. It covers the wide range of what were considered the sciences a few centuries ago, and he's not really overwhelming a non-specialist reader. It's a very short book. As you can see, it comes in at just 140 pages. So, if you're worried about length, it's not too bad. And the other reason why I think it's such a great book, like I said earlier, is he continually stresses the continuity between what we would consider magic and empirical, rational, deductive reasoning, or what we would more likely associate today with science. He does this effectively in every chapter, and as someone who has a pretty long-standing interest in the history of medieval and Renaissance science, it's really refreshing to see an author who isn't trying to retrospectively make modern science out of something by Paracelsus, or so supposedly written by Hermes Trismegistus, or another one of those alchemal Neoplatonic works. He lets the two stand side by side in whatever tension they might have with one another, and from our modern eyes there is quite a bit of tension there, but he deals with them as they are, not as he wants them to be. So, if that sounds interesting, Man and Nature in the Renaissance by Alan G. Debus.